And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on Apologetics, and we were talking with Patrick Chester about the virtue of gratitude. And some really interesting insights. It's funny how, sometimes ingratitude sneaks up on us, because it comes in some very strange forms, like you pointed out right before the break. Two very diametrically opposed, but in a way the same,
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just let you move on from there.
Well, the next sin that typically comes up is envy, which is frequently kind of posed as the counter or the opposite of kindness. And so as every deadly sin has a false idol, pride's was the self. Envy's is usually whatever the object or the thing is that's being envied, because I have a misconception that this material thing brings superiority. So the overt form of envy that most people would think of is that it's entirely materialism based. When we see something that somebody else has and we wish it was ours, or we wish they did not have it. In either case, it's because this thing brings about a superiority. That they have it means that they have something better, and you wish that they didn't. Now, the insidious form of pride is, I like to think of it is when you start comparing yourself to others in a reference of better than or worse than. Because, like the covert form of pride, what this looks like in practice is beating yourself up because somebody else is doing better. In seminary, this is actually a really big problem, because you've got guys who are at all different levels of the spiritual life and different ways of expressing that spiritual life. So you'll have one guy who's certainly prays a whole lot, but he sees this other dude who every time he ever sees him, he's in the chapel, he's praying, he's walking around out in the courtyard doing a rosary walk or something. And this kind of turns into this concept that this guy's better than me. This guy's holier than me. You don't know what somebody's heart's like, but it turns into this, this idea that there's something lacking. And it's rooted in ingratitude, like pride, because it's a failure to recognize that what gives you value isn't necessarily a particular thing or a particular behavior, and you're not recognizing where that value comes from. So because no two people are the same, comparing yourselves with a better or worse judgment isn't very helpful. You can be grateful, and this is where it comes in. And this is actually really difficult, is you have to be able to be grateful for the blessings that you have that not everyone else does, and also for the blessings that other people have that you might not believe you do. And that's a hard thing to do, but that comes with recognizing everything as gift, which we tend to be really bad at. We don't like the fact that all is gift. We say it a lot, but we don't like it because we want to be able to sit down at this negotiating table with God and have something to offer. But everything we have to offer God, he gave us first. And so we go there feeling a little empty-handed, because we are, in terms of empty-handed from anything that we made without him. Moving right along, look at wrath, the opposite of patience, one of my favorite deadly sins, I have to admit. The idol of wrath is control. It's not just anger. Anger is an emotion. It's a feeling. It's a passion. That's not a decision. Wrath is when you act. All the sins. It's only a sin if there's a decision involved. And in wrath, you are attempting to exact your will on the world, be it through manipulation, threats, outright violence. But it's always an effort to make things fit and go the way you want. And this one's pretty simple in terms of how it comes overtly or covertly. Overtly, it's outward directed. You're trying to control everybody else or something out there in the world. The covert form is when you are trying to have an impossible kind of self-control. It's inward directed. And that includes having unreasonable and unjust self-expectations, leading up to perhaps even things such as violent self-harm. Because, and where does that come from? In ingratitude, you're failing to recognize that God gives you what you need in the moment to grow in the holiness that you are called to. We're rejecting that God is in control, and that God wills us to be, and that he's with us. Instead, we're in the mindset of, I have to make this happen or it won't happen. And it's a rejection of providence, and substituting in my own vision. So how does patience come from gratitude? part of embracing something as a gift is choosing to trust. You're trusting in their intentions for giving and entrusting the thing to you. In this case, ourselves, our lives, even our challenges sometimes. Patience isn't a matter of just waiting and doing nothing, but it's doing what is necessary to act according to faith and reason, not passion and desire.
Yeah, very interesting. My question with the inward version of wrath, would that be where scrupulosity comes in? Is that part of that?
Yes, scrupulosity and perfectionism are both going to come. Again, this is my own kind of personal way of categorizing things, but it's been very helpful for me evaluating my own tendencies. And I have identified scrupulosity and perfectionism with wrath it typically comes with that type of frustration and anger and then doubling down and trying even harder but it turns into a self-reliance, and self-reliance, as they tell us in seminary, is not a Christian virtue. You should be able to take care of yourself. That's one thing, but you cannot rely on yourself as the only thing. Even what you have, you still have to recognize that, like Christ says, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Someone taught that man to fish and put the fish in the world and gave the man the skills he needs. That still has to be recognized. So we're not saying you shouldn't ever take care of yourself or anything like that, but we are saying recognize there are limitations and your ability to do things is still rooted in gift.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I never thought of connecting the two. That's very interesting. So you have wrath, and then the opposite is patience?
Yeah, patience is usually portrayed as the opposite of wrath, because patience is the willingness to take a step back, and it's not an idle waiting. It's not just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. It's an attentiveness, where you're looking for the proper time and place for everything. You can hear, Ecclesiastes coming in there, but it's that sense of, what's going on, or at least you know what you need to know, and you're acting in accordance with faith and reason there, not being motivated out of just passion or desire or false expectations like those. We'll go for sloth. Okay. Typically, sloth is portrayed as the opposite of diligence. The idol of sloth is comfort. It's avoiding things that shouldn't be avoided, usually because you're trying to avoid being uncomfortable. I usually find in my own life that sloth is a sin of omission, where it's a failure to do something that needs to be done. And the overt way I see that play out in my own life is avoiding responsibilities with what seems like a lazy avoidance. Simply not doing it or doing something I like instead. But a dangerous and insidious form of it, what I call, again, the covert form, is avoiding one responsibility by hyper-focusing on another legitimate responsibility. And kind of where we want to boil in here is the intention. Because everyone's busy and there's always more things to do than we can possibly do. But the sloth here is when you intentionally throw yourself into one thing that you do have to do as an excuse to avoid doing something else. And an example that you might see here is a husband and a father who becomes a workaholic to avoid the challenges of marriage and priesthood. He does have a responsibility, properly speaking, to provide for them, but he also has a responsibility to be there for them. And so if he starts to use work as an excuse to avoid the discomforts of home, that's a form of sloth, and it's wrapped in the appearance of a hard work ethic. So it can be very insidious. Yeah. And this one's very direct in terms of how it comes out of ingratitude. Our responsibilities and duties are the results of gifts from God, if not gifts in themselves. Because, and this is kind of an important thing, sometimes when we get a gift, receiving that gift bears with it a responsibility to use it well. And we see this in a very basic, simple way of just like, when mom gives us something for Christmas, even if it's not something that's really important, we kind of have this special like sense of I need to do something with this or special with this or put it somewhere, not because of necessarily what the gift itself is, but because of who the giver was. And we recognize to some level that to dishonor or disrespect the gift that's given is to disrespect the person who gave it to us. And so that ties back into sloth, is that we recognize that, like the talents given to the servants, we're responsible for what we choose to do with them because of who gave them to us. And the counter, of course, diligence being, it's just recognizing your duty to act. It's gratitude should impel that desire to use a gift well or to respect the gift because of who gave it. And it's an act of ingratitude to reject what you've been given. And you do that either by using it wrong or by not using it where you should.